I should tell you right now that I'm recording this from a motel room 300 miles from Fogo Island, and I haven't slept properly in 4 days. My hands are still shaking as I type this. The police took my statement, took my camera equipment, took everything except the memories I can't seem to scrub from my head. They said they'd investigate. They said a lot of things, but I know they won't find anything because whatever happened on that island doesn't want to be found. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm a documentary filmmaker, or at least I was. I specialized in small-town stories, forgotten communities, the kind of places that time seems to pass by. Places where people still know their neighbors' names and strangers are noticed the moment they arrive. 6 weeks ago, I received an email from a woman named Helen Mercer, a resident of Fogo Island off the coast of Newfoundland. She said her town was dying, that young people were leaving in droves, and she wanted someone to document what remained before it disappeared entirely. It seemed like exactly the kind of project I'd built my career on. Intimate, human, real. I should have asked why she was so insistent I come in February. The crossing from Farewell was rough. The ferry, the MV Veteran, rocked through gray water that looked more like slate than ocean, and the wind coming off the Atlantic cut through my winter coat like it wasn't even there. I remember standing on the deck, watching Fogo Island materialize through the spray and mist, this dark mass of rock and scattered buildings that seemed to crouch against the horizon. The captain, an older man with a face weathered by decades of salt and wind, told me I'd picked a hell of a week to visit. Storm coming, he said, not looking at me, just staring ahead at the island. Big one. Could be stuck there a few days if it hits right. I told him that was fine. I had nowhere else to be. He made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something else. Everyone's got somewhere else to be than Fogo in February, son. Everyone except the people who don't have a choice. The town of Fogo itself is small, maybe 400 permanent residents, though Helen had mentioned that number had been closer to 1,000 just 20 years ago. The buildings are mostly traditional Newfoundland saltbox houses, painted in faded reds and blues and yellows, clustered along the rocky coastline like they're huddling together for warmth. When I drove off the ferry that afternoon, the streets were empty. Not just quiet. Empty in a way that felt deliberate, like the town was holding its breath. Helen met me at the bed and breakfast she ran out of her home, a yellow 2-story house on the north side of town with a view of the ocean that must have been stunning in summer, but in February just looked hostile. She was in her 60s, thin and sharp-featured, with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her handshake was firm, her smile welcoming, but there was something in her eyes that I couldn't quite read. Relief, maybe, or worry. "You made it," she said, like she hadn't been entirely sure I would. Come in, come in. You must be frozen." The inside of her house was warm and cluttered in the way homes of people who've lived in one place for decades always are. Photographs covering every wall, shelves packed with books and knickknacks, the smell of something baking in the kitchen. She made me tea, and we sat at her kitchen table while the wind rattled the windows, and she told me about Fogo. The fishing industry had collapsed, she said. The young people left for the mainland, for jobs, for futures that didn't exist on a rock in the North Atlantic. The population was aging, businesses were closing, the school had combined 3 grades into 1 classroom just to stay open. It was the same story I'd heard in a dozen other small towns, the slow death of a way of life. But there was something else, something she didn't say directly but that I could feel underneath her words. A hesitation, a carefulness in how she described the last few years. "People are different now," she said finally, looking down at her tea. Quieter, like something's weighing on them. I asked her what she meant, and she just shook her head. "You'll see. Talk to people. That's why you're here, isn't it?" I spent the first 2 days doing exactly that. I set up interviews with the mayor, the owner of the general store, a fisherman named Tom who'd been working these waters for 40 years, a young couple who'd decided to stay and try to make a life here despite everything. I filmed the landscape, the endless gray ocean, the rocky shores, the houses standing against the wind. I captured the beautiful desolation of it all, and slowly, I began to notice things. The way conversations would stop when I walked into a room. The way people's eyes would drift to the windows, especially as the afternoon wore on and the light began to fail. The way no one seemed to be out after dark. Not just few people, no one. By 5 p.m., when the winter sun set and true darkness fell, Fogo Island might as well have been abandoned. On the 3rd day, I asked Helen about it directly. Why does everyone stay inside after dark? She was quiet for a long time, standing at her kitchen sink, looking out at the twilight. It's February, she said finally. It's cold. People stay in when it's cold. Helen, I've filmed in Alaska in January. I've been to northern communities where it hits -40. People still go out. They still live their lives. She turned to look at me then, and for just a moment, I saw something in her face. Fear. Real, visceral fear. This is different, she said quietly. The cold here, it's different. I should have pressed her. I should have asked what she meant. But something in her expression made me stop, made me change the subject, made me feel like I was standing at the edge of something I wasn't ready to look into. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind was howling, rattling the windows of my room on Helen's second floor, and I kept thinking about what she'd said. The cold here is different. I got up around 2 a.m., thinking I'd make some tea, maybe do some work on my laptop. From the landing at the top of the stairs, I could see down into the kitchen through the doorway. Helen was sitting at the table in the dark, still dressed, just sitting there, staring at the back door. I watched her for maybe 10 minutes. She didn't move, didn't even seem to blink, just sat there in the darkness, watching the door like she was waiting for something to come through it. I went back to bed and didn't mention it in the morning. The storm the ferry captain had warned about arrived on day 4. I woke to a world of white, snow driving horizontally past my window, the wind screaming like something alive. Helen told me at breakfast that the ferry had been canceled, that no one was getting on or off the island until it passed. She said this matter-of-factly, but I noticed she kept touching a small silver cross she wore around her neck, her fingers worrying at it like a prayer bead. How long do these usually last? I asked. 3 days, usually. Sometimes longer. She paused, looking out the window. This one might be longer. I decided to use the time to explore the town on foot to get footage of the storm. Helen tried to discourage me, said it was dangerous, that I could get lost even in a town this small when the snow was this heavy. But I've worked in blizzards before. I knew how to stay safe. I made it about 6 blocks before I realized she wasn't worried about me getting lost in the storm. The town in daylight, even in a blizzard, was eerie. The streets were completely empty. No cars moving, no one out shoveling, no lights in windows. It was like everyone had simply vanished. I walked down the main street, past the general store and the post office and the small church, and the only sound was the wind and my own breathing inside my scarf. Then I saw the first one. A figure standing in the middle of the street about 50 yards ahead of me. Just standing there in the driving snow, completely still. I stopped, pulled my camera up, started filming. Through the viewfinder, I could see it was a person, definitely a person, wearing dark clothing but no apparent winter gear, no hat or gloves despite the wind chill being well below freezing. I called out, my voice swallowed almost immediately by the storm. The figure didn't respond, didn't move. I started walking toward it, slowly, filming as I went. I got within maybe 30 yards when it turned and walked away, disappearing into the white. Not running, just walking, calm and steady, vanishing into the blizzard like it had never been there. I followed. I don't know why. Instinct, maybe. The documentarian in me that always chases the story. I pushed through the snow, my camera running, following the direction the figure had gone. I found myself at the edge of town, where the houses stopped and the bare rock and scrub brush began, the land sloping down toward the ocean. And there, standing in a rough circle in the snow, were 7 figures. All completely still, all facing inward, toward the center of the circle where there was nothing but white ground and blowing snow. I stood there filming them for maybe 2 minutes. They didn't move, didn't acknowledge me, didn't even seem to breathe. Through my viewfinder, I could see they were all wearing regular clothes, not winter gear, and none of them seemed bothered by the cold. Then, all at once, they turned and looked at me. I don't remember running. I don't remember the route I took back. I just remember being suddenly back at Helen's house, slamming through the door, my camera clutched against my chest, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might be having a heart attack. Helen was there in seconds, locking the door behind me, her face pale. "You saw them," she said. Not a question, a statement. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. She led me to the kitchen, made me sit, put something warm in my hands. Tea, probably. I couldn't taste it. "I should have told you," she said quietly. "But if I had, you wouldn't have come. And we needed someone to come. Someone from outside." What the hell were those things? My voice didn't sound like my own. Helen sat down across from me. The afternoon light was already fading, even though it wasn't quite 4 p.m. She looked older than she had that morning, tired in a way that went deeper than just lack of sleep. We call them the Silent Ones, she said. They started appearing 2 years ago, just after the Dawson family disappeared. She told me the story in a flat, emotionless voice, like she'd told it so many times it had lost its power to affect her. The Dawsons, a family of 4, parents and 2 teenage kids, had lived on the western side of the island. In February 2 years ago, during a storm much like this one, they'd simply vanished. Their house was unlocked, their car in the driveway, food on the table like they'd been in the middle of dinner. But they were gone. The RCMP came, did an investigation, searched the island, searched the water, found nothing. No bodies, no evidence of foul play, nothing. It was like they'd simply ceased to exist. And then, 3 days after they disappeared, people started seeing figures standing outside in the cold. At first we thought they were search and rescue, Helen said. People looking for the Dawsons. But they never came to the door, never spoke to anyone, just stood there, watching. And they were always there after dark, just standing in the streets, in yards, looking at houses. I struggled to find words. That's insane. You called the police, right? Of course we did. They came out, looked around, found nothing, said we were seeing things, that it was the stress of the disappearance making us paranoid. She laughed, a bitter sound. But it kept happening, night after night. And then people started disappearing. What do you mean disappearing? Just what I said. In 2s and 3s, always during storms, always in February. They'd go to bed in their houses with the doors locked, and in the morning they'd be gone. No sign of a struggle, no tracks in the snow, nothing. Just gone. I felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. How many? 23 people in 2 years. The police investigated every single case. They found nothing, no evidence of anything. So they stopped coming. Told us people were probably just leaving, moving to the mainland without telling anyone. Can you imagine? 23 people just deciding to leave in the middle of winter storms without packing a single thing. And the figures? The Silent Ones. They're always there. Every night, especially during storms. Standing in the streets, standing in yards, watching. Always watching. We learned to stay inside. Lock the doors. Don't go out after dark, no matter what. Don't open the door if someone knocks. Don't look at them directly if you see them through the window. I set down my tea. My hands were shaking. Helen, why didn't you tell me this? Why did you bring me here? She met my eyes, and I saw desperation there. Because no one believes us. The police think we're hysterical. The government thinks we're trying to get disaster relief money. People on the mainland think we're trying to create some kind of urban legend to attract tourists, like those cryptid towns. We needed proof. We needed someone from outside to document it. You used me as bait. No. She shook her head firmly. I would never deliberately put you in danger. But I hoped that if you were here, if you saw them, if you got them on camera, we'd finally have evidence. Something that couldn't be dismissed. I thought about my camera, about the footage I'd just captured. I got them on camera. The circle, all 7 of them. For the first time since I'd met her, Helen smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been proven right about something terrible. Good, she said. Then maybe now someone will finally believe us. We spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing my footage on my laptop. Even on the screen, in the bright kitchen light, the Silent Ones were disturbing. There was something fundamentally wrong about them. Something that went beyond just people standing in the snow. The way they stood too still. The way the snow seemed to fall around them rather than on them. The way they all turned in perfect unison to look at the camera. And their faces. When I zoomed in on the footage, their faces were visible for just a few frames. They were human faces, but wrong somehow. Too smooth, too blank, like masks of human faces rather than the real thing. And their eyes were completely black. Jesus Christ, I whispered. Helen was standing behind me, looking over my shoulder. Every single person who's disappeared, we've seen them afterwards. Walking the streets, standing in the circles. But they're not themselves anymore. It's like something's wearing them. As she said this, my blood ran cold. Wait, are you saying those things out there are the missing people? I'm saying they look like the missing people. Robert Dawson, the father, I've seen him, standing outside the general store at night, just watching. His daughter Emma, I've seen her too. Others I've known my whole life. I see them out there now, standing in the cold. This isn't possible, I said, even as I was looking at the evidence on my screen. This doesn't make any sense. None of it makes sense, Helen said quietly. But it's happening anyway. The storm continued to rage outside. Through the window, I could see the light fading fast, the short February day dying into what would be a long, dark night. Helen moved through the house methodically, checking every window, every door, making sure everything was locked. I noticed she had boards leaning against the wall near each door, like she was prepared to barricade herself in if necessary. You do this every night? I asked. Every night since this started. Everyone on the island does. We go inside before dark and we don't come out until sunrise. Not for anything. And it works? You're safe inside. She hesitated. Mostly. The ones who disappeared. We don't know if they went outside or if something got in. But as long as you stay inside, stay quiet, don't acknowledge them. They just watch. They just watch, I repeated. That's almost worse. I know. Dinner that night was a quiet affair. Helen had made a fish stew, traditional Newfoundland cooking, but neither of us had much appetite. We ate by the light of the kitchen lamp, not talking much, both of us acutely aware of the darkness pressing against the windows. Around 7 p.m., I heard it for the first time. A sound from outside, muffled by the wind but distinct. Footsteps crunching in the snow, walking past the house. Slow, measured steps. Not the hurried steps of someone trying to get out of the cold, but the patient, steady steps of someone with nowhere to be and all the time in the world to get there. Helen didn't react, didn't even look up from her stew, but I saw her hand tighten on her spoon. The footsteps passed by the kitchen window. I couldn't help myself. I turned to look. A figure was walking past, not 5 feet from the window. Dark clothes, no winter gear, moving through the storm like it wasn't even there. As I watched, it stopped, turned, looked directly at me through the window. It had Tom's face. Tom, the fisherman I'd interviewed 2 days ago. Tom, who'd told me stories about 40 years on these waters, who'd shown me pictures of his grandchildren. But the eyes were wrong. Completely black, like holes into nothing. Don't look at them, Helen said quietly, not looking up. The more attention you pay them, the more interested they become. I turned away from the window, my heart racing. That was Tom. Tom Brennan. I know. He's missing. Since last week. His wife Alice found his house empty one morning after a storm. He's been walking the streets ever since. I thought about Alice, Tom's wife, still here on the island, having to see her husband walking past her window every night, wearing his face but not being him. The horror of that was almost incomprehensible. The footsteps moved on, continuing down the street. But over the next hour, there were more. Sometimes single sets of footsteps, sometimes multiple. Always the same slow, patient pace. Always passing by the house, sometimes stopping at the window, always moving on. Around 9 p.m., someone knocked on the front door. The sound was so normal, so ordinary, that for a moment my brain didn't register the wrongness of it. Just 3 firm knocks, the kind of knock a neighbor might make when they came over to borrow something. Helen went completely still. She slowly reached across the table and gripped my wrist, hard. Don't answer it, she whispered. Don't say anything. Don't even breathe loud. We sat there in complete silence. The knock came again. 3 firm knocks, patient, almost polite. Then a voice, muffled by the door. Helen? It's David. Can I come in? It's cold out here. Helen's face had gone white. Her fingers dug into my wrist like claws. David's my son, she whispered. He went missing 3 months ago. The voice came again, still calm, still patient. Mom? I know you're in there. I can hear you. Please let me in. I just want to come home. It was horrible, listening to it. The voice sounded exactly like what you'd imagine a cold, tired son would sound like asking to come home. But Helen wasn't moving, wasn't responding, was barely even breathing. Please, Mom. It's so cold out here. Why won't you let me in? For 5 full minutes, the voice continued. Sometimes pleading, sometimes just talking, telling Helen about being out in the cold, about wanting to come home, about not understanding why she wouldn't open the door. The voice never sounded angry, never sounded frustrated. Just patient, endlessly patient. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the voice had been. Helen finally released my wrist. In the lamplight, I could see tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, I said. It felt inadequate, but what else was there to say? Every night, she said quietly. Every night he comes. Sometimes it's him, sometimes it's others. But there's always someone at the door. Someone you knew, someone you loved, using their voice, saying exactly what they know would make you want to open the door. But you don't. But we don't. Because the people we loved are gone. Whatever those things are, they're not our families anymore. The night stretched on. I tried to sleep around midnight, going up to my room while Helen stayed downstairs. But sleep was impossible. Every sound made me jump. Every creak of the house in the wind sounded like footsteps. And through my window, when I dared to look, I could see them. Figures standing in the street below, sometimes alone, sometimes in groups, always still, always watching the houses. At some point, I must have dozed off despite myself, because I woke suddenly to Helen shaking my shoulder. Pale gray dawn light was filtering through the window, and the wind had died down. "They're gone," she said. "They always leave when the sun comes up. But Marcus, you need to see something." I followed her downstairs and to the front door. She opened it carefully, and we stepped out onto the porch. The snow had stopped, and in the gray morning light, I could see the street clearly. And there, in the fresh snow, were footprints. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all around Helen's house. Circles of footprints, like people had been walking around and around the building all night. But the disturbing part wasn't the number of prints, it was their pattern. Every single set of prints stopped at the edge of the porch. Perfect circles around the house, but none of them came up the steps. It was like there was an invisible barrier they couldn't or wouldn't cross. "What?" I started, but I didn't know how to finish the question. "We think it's the houses themselves," Helen said quietly. "Something about being invited in. They can walk up to the door, they can knock, they can call out. But they can't come inside unless we open the door, unless we let them in. Like vampires." She laughed, a sound without humor. "Yeah, like vampires. Except these things don't want our blood. They want us. To take us wherever they take people. To make us like them." We stood there for a long moment, looking at the footprints circling the house, and I thought about spending another night here. Another night listening to the patient voices at the door, the slow footsteps, the watching figures. I thought about David, Helen's son, standing outside in the cold every night, calling for his mother. "I need to leave," I said. "I need to get this footage off the island, show it to people, get help." Helen nodded. "The ferry's still canceled. Storm's supposed to continue for at least 2 more days. Then I'll drive. There must be another way off the island." "There isn't. The ferry's the only way. And even if it weren't canceled, do you think they'd let you leave?" I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Everyone who's tried to leave since this started, everyone who's tried to get help from the mainland, they disappear. The last RCMP officer who came to investigate, he disappeared. The reporter from St. John's who came to do a story, she disappeared. They don't want the outside world to know about them. They don't want anyone interfering. So what? We're just trapped here. We're just supposed to wait until they take us too." "I don't know," Helen said quietly. "That's why I brought you here. I thought maybe you'd see something we missed. Find some explanation. I thought maybe a fresh perspective would help." I spent that day reviewing all my footage, everything I'd filmed since arriving. The interviews with the townspeople, the landscape shots, the final disturbing footage of the silent ones. I watched it over and over, looking for some clue, some detail I'd missed. And I found something. In the background of one of my interviews with Tom, filmed 2 days before he disappeared, there was a figure standing in the distance. Just standing there, watching. I hadn't noticed it while filming, but on the footage it was clear. And when I zoomed in, enhanced the image, I could see the face. It was Tom. I was looking at footage of Tom from 2 days ago, and in the background, Tom was watching himself be interviewed. Or something wearing Tom's face was watching. I showed it to Helen, and watched the color drain from her face. "That's not possible," she whispered. "It's on the footage. It's right there." We went through the other interviews. In the background of my interview with the mayor, there were 3 figures watching. In the background of my interview with the young couple, there were 5. Every single interview I'd done, there had been silent ones watching, and I hadn't seen any of them at the time. "They've been watching you since you arrived," Helen said. "They knew you were here. They've been deciding what to do with you." That night was worse than the previous one. The knocking started earlier, around 6 p.m. Different voices this time. My sister's voice, calling my name. My father's voice, asking me to come outside to talk. Voices of people I knew were thousands of miles away, had been for years, couldn't possibly be here. But the silent ones knew them. They'd looked into my head somehow and pulled out the voices that would hurt the most to hear. Helen and I sat in the kitchen, not speaking, just listening to the chorus of voices outside, the patient knocking, the footsteps circling the house. And through it all, I kept thinking about the pattern, the way they operated, the way they took people, the way they used the forms of the missing. They're learning, I said suddenly. They're learning how to be human. Helen looked at me. What? Think about it. They don't know how to be cold. They don't know what clothing is for. They don't know how to talk naturally. Every conversation they have sounds slightly off, slightly wrong. But they're getting better. They're using the people they take to learn how to imitate us better. To what end? I don't know. To spread? To take more people? To eventually be able to pass as human well enough that they can leave the island undetected? I stood up, started pacing. What if this is just the beginning? What if Fogo is just the first place? Helen's face had gone very pale. We need to destroy them. All of them. How? We don't even know what they are. Ghosts? Aliens? Some kind of collective consciousness. They're using the bodies or faces of the missing, but are the original people dead? Transformed? Trapped somewhere? We didn't have answers. We just had questions and footage and the certain knowledge that come sunrise, the silent ones would disappear, and we'd have another day to try to figure out what to do. But the storm didn't stop. The next day brought more snow, heavier winds, and the ferry remained canceled. I was trapped on Fogo Island with no way off and no idea how long I'd be there. That afternoon, Helen told me there was someone I needed to meet. A woman named Margaret who lived on the eastern edge of town. She was the grandmother of Emma Dawson, one of the first people to disappear. Margaret's house was small and cluttered, filled with the kind of things people accumulate over a lifetime. She was in her 80s, frail and thin, but her mind was sharp. She made us tea, and we sat in her cramped living room while the storm rattled her windows. I know what they are, she said without preamble. Or at least, I know what they might be. Tell me, I said, setting up my camera to record. My grandmother told me stories when I was a girl. Old stories, the kind the Irish brought with them when they settled here. Stories about the grey folk, the gentry, the ones who walk between worlds. They had many names, but they were always the same. Beings that looked like people but weren't, that could steal your face and walk in your shape. Fairies, I said, trying to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Margaret's eyes flashed. Not fairies like in children's books, boy. The old kind. The dangerous kind. The kind that would steal children, leave changelings in their place. The kind that lived in the cold, dark places and preyed on the unwary. I thought those were just stories. All stories come from somewhere. And my grandmother said they were particularly drawn to places like this. Islands. Places where the barrier between worlds is thin. She said if they ever came, we'd know by the cold. They bring the cold with them. It gets inside you, changes you, makes you into one of them. Helen leaned forward. How do we stop them? The old stories say you can't kill them. Not really, but you can drive them back. Iron worked, sometimes. Prayers, salt, fire, the things of human warmth and human making. But most of all, you needed to not let them in. Not into your house, not into your heart, not into your head. We haven't let them in, Helen said. We've stayed inside, kept the doors locked. Margaret looked at her sadly. Have you though? Every night you listen to them, use the voices of your loved ones. Every night they show you the faces of people you've lost. Every night they knock, and you have to resist opening the door. How long do you think you can last? How long before the loneliness and the grief break you down, and you open the door just to make it stop? The truth of her words settled over us like the snow settling over the island. This wasn't a siege that would end. This was a war of attrition, and the silent ones had infinite patience. Then we need to leave, I said. All of us. Evacuate the island. And go where? Margaret asked. And how? The moment anyone tries to organize a mass evacuation, people disappear. The moment anyone tries to leave, they disappear. They're keeping us here deliberately. Why? What do they want? Margaret smiled, but there was no humor in it. They want what all such things want. To grow. To spread. To turn our world into theirs. Fogo is just the beginning. But first, they need to figure out how to be human well enough to pass. Once they do that, once they perfect the disguise, they'll leave. And then nowhere will be safe. I left Margaret's house feeling worse than when I'd arrived. I had footage, I had theories, but I had no solutions. And with every hour that passed, the storm continued and my chances of getting off the island diminished. That night, the knocking was more insistent, the voices more desperate, and for the first time, I heard something new. Scratching at the door. Slow, methodical scratching, like something testing the wood, looking for weaknesses. Helen heard it too. We looked at each other across the kitchen table, and I saw real fear in her eyes for the first time. "They've never done that before," she whispered. The scratching continued for hours. Sometimes at the front door, sometimes at the back, sometimes at the windows. Always slow, always patient, always testing. Around midnight, it stopped. The silence was absolute. No wind, no scratching, no voices. Just silence. "Something's wrong," Helen said. We sat there in the quiet, barely breathing, waiting. And then I heard it. A single set of footsteps, walking up the porch steps. The old wood creaking under weight. Then nothing. A piece of paper slid under the front door. Helen and I looked at each other. Neither of us moved for a long moment. Then, slowly, Helen stood and walked to the door. She bent down, picked up the paper, came back to the kitchen. It was a photograph. Old, faded, the kind printed on actual photo paper. It showed a group of people standing in front of a house. I recognized the house. It was Helen's house, this house, but the photo was from decades ago. "That's my family," Helen whispered, her finger hovering over the image. "My parents, my siblings. This was taken 40 years ago. Where did they get it?" "It was in a box in my attic. In a sealed box with other family photos. They were in my house." The implications of that settled over us like ice water. The silent ones hadn't just been outside. At some point, somehow, they'd been inside. They'd been in Helen's attic, going through her personal belongings, learning about her history, her family. "We're not safe here," I said. "If they can get inside." "They can't," Helen said, but she didn't sound convinced. "The doors are locked. The windows are locked. There's no way they could have gotten in without us hearing." But we both knew that wasn't true. We both knew that at some point, maybe days ago, maybe weeks ago, the silent ones had found a way inside. And if they could do it once, they could do it again. We spent the rest of the night awake, jumping at every sound, staring at every shadow. When dawn finally came, pale and gray through the storm, we were exhausted and terrified. The storm broke on day 7. I woke to silence and opened the curtains to see clear sky for the first time since I'd arrived. The ocean was still rough, but the snow had stopped and the wind had died. Helen called the ferry service. They'd resume crossings that afternoon. "I'm leaving," I told her. "I'm getting off this island, and I'm taking this footage to every news station, every government office, every person who will listen." Helen nodded. "I know. I'm leaving too. I can't stay here anymore. Not after last night. Whatever's happening."